Do two men take the road together if they have not planned to do so? The exact translation would be, do two walk together unless they have agreed? I remember some years ago I was bringing a friend who was with me for a while on reflection, and who some time later I did the marriage of actually in Italy, and she noticed you two in the grounds of the monastery, and we commented to each other how good it is to see two sisters just happy to walk together. And it is a great help as one goes through life to have someone who is walking the journey and understands what's there. A burden shared is a burden halved. And those who haven't got that consolation are more at risk. There's no safety valve. We don't need an awful lot of people in our life, but we need one or two who will always be there. Of course, the time comes when they're no longer there. That's the case with your mother right now. But it's not, for a Christian, a tragedy. It's just handing over and waiting until we meet again. How different it is from many a funeral where that is not the case, where there's a great shock in the air, and they're increasing rather than decreasing. Suicides, overdoses, and you name it. On this day, we're remembering those who went into the beyond, not peacefully, but in violence, the Roman martyrs. And this day, I went back to my classic roots, because, as you know, I did classics there, and we spent time with these authors, Tacitus and the like, who would be describing what was going on. And they themselves are obviously aware what probably actually happened. We can't prove it, but this fire in 64 in Rome, the Great Fire of Rome, could well have been actually orchestrated by the emperor himself so as to build a new Rome. A great endeavour, but of course it backfired completely and people were suspecting him, and what happened, of course, was history using a scapegoat, these Christians. So that was the beginning of what took off, of course, the great apostles as well, Peter and Paul. But the ingeniousness of the torches invented was something else, and it shows actually what humanity is capable of, man's inhumanity to man, and it's not gone away. If one looks around, even now, what's going on in totalitarian regimes, the ingenuity of man to invent pain is quite demonic. Let's use the word. This need for cruelty, pain, and so on, where is it coming from? But the last word, of course, is not on this side. And each one who causes pain one day has to face also the same judge. And then there may be a few surprises. I remember being told way back in Rome, when doing a course with Father Paul Murray, how there are sort of two ways of having power on earth. One is through the influence that comes spontaneously from goodness and love. I heard this way back in France from Don Lucien, who was the world expert actually on L'Abbé de Rancé. He was the great reformer of La Trappe. And he explained how, despite the fact that L'Abbé de Rancé was terribly, terribly strict, he was loved. He was loved by his community, and that can be sensed from the correspondence of the time. The bonding was there. It's the case of a good abbot who radiates and has power through love and a willingness on the part of the brethren to be led. The other is the opposite. Power, for those who can't get that, through just the other side. Fear. And it can happen also in Christian souls. This influence we can have over others through a form of terror. It can happen in marriages. Women, for instance, can be good at getting power through moods, and the husband might back down for the sake of peace. control. This led me to look into something I knew I had in my library somewhere, and it was there. It's what's happened in more recent times where Nero has come to the fore. You may have heard of this series of exorcisms in Germany in the mid-1970s. It was obviously allowed by divine providence so that the things coming out from the jaws of hell might indicate that there was more going on earth at that time than meets the eye. In other words, it was demonic in part, the crumbling of things which until then had been solid. St. John the 23rd was moved by the Holy Spirit to bring together the bishops of the world to open the doors to renewal. But immediately the forces of hell became agitated and started to zoom into it and to creep into the loopholes and crannies that could be used. And we know the consequences. And some of that came out in these exorcisms in Germany. And in it, a load of things which weren't expected came out. Of course, it was taped. The tapes are there, and one can hear the words of the demons. But what came out surprisingly was that there weren't just demons in there, but also human demons. And some were giving their name. It was in Germany. Hitler was there. And there was somebody who had died in 1937 who gave this long message to her former friend afterwards, saying there was no point in praying for, that she was lost. And that was the hell letter, which I translated from French. But it was there, she was there lost, and her soul was around too and saying things. But one of the ones who came out of it all was Nero. Judas was also there. To say Cain, which by the way indicates that the narrative in Genesis is true. Because if Cain is there, it meant that he'd existed. The story was therefore handed down. But anyway, this bit which came from the mouth of Nero is interesting. He is obliged and obedient to say certain things and to reveal where certain things were coming from. There was a push from down under to destroy the means of salvation, to make weak the church. Of course, it was in the interests of the demonic forces, because that would lead to weakening of grace on earth and weakening of souls. Easy prey then for further temptation. So, the hatred for the rosary was being pushed by them because it was an awful tool against them. It's a weapon, a strong weapon against Satan and against us. The falling apart of discipline with regard to Sunday Mass was being pushed by them. Of course, one thing which helped a lot was what was just starting at this time on the continent, the making possible to not go to church at all on a Sunday by bringing forward the obligation to Saturday evening. It was already putting in the air the mentality that Sunday was a day of complete freedom. It wasn't quite the same as when everyone went on a Sunday morning. It kept that part sacred for the whole society, basically. Now we have football going on that behind. But then he goes on to liturgical things which were being pushed by the other side. Then the altar facing the people, that was pushed by them. And of course there are profound reasons for that. It's that the dynamics at that point are no longer the same as when the priest is just thinking about God and facing God. He's thinking about people, if he's honest. It's not the same. So it makes the dynamic very much more human. And then he goes on to indicate how it was a Protestantization of things. It was actually going after the evangelicals, and it was commanded by, number one, Lucifer. And then he goes on to the question of doctrine, indicating true doctrine was the Catholic faith. The Catholics were going after the Protestants like harlots. And then he goes on about synods and the like, indicating how completely useless they were because bishops ought to know full well what they should do, but they talk and talk and talk. That sounds very familiar in our time. So we can see that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg in our time, years later now, when we've seen how things have really come apart. It was very, very well orchestrated. And I remember hearing this from somebody who had been in Maynooth, I think on the staff, and he was quoting another good member of staff some years back. And this very good priest was saying down in Maynooth, one cannot explain the destruction of the Catholic Church in pure human terms. He could see quite clearly what was at work. So now let's make a jump to our time with this pandemic. Is it just a question of hygiene and this and that certain things are no longer allowed to happen, and if they do happen with great limitations and with conditions which are reflecting some of that? One asks, how clever old Nick is. Now, the first obedience we have is to God. One questions to what extent, in all situations, one has to just go along without any resistance whatsoever to what odd forces are demanding. It would seem that they presume that they can do anything they want with the church. Oh, Christians, they're an easy target. They always say yes, 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 and we're doing that. Well, just to be aware. Okay, we keep a low profile, but souls also have their right, divinely given. And it's a very thin frontier between the kind of thing that we see going on in totalitarian states, and that's starting to happen now in Christian lands. You need to be very careful. For instance, specifically, to refuse Holy Communion to a person because that soul will not receive it on the tongue, is a form of bullying. It's extremely uncharitable. It's the very heart of the life of the church. All because we're, without any question, saying yes, 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 to what health authorities want us to do. Then not accepting more than 50 people just like that into church, and saying no to the 51st person. Is that what Jesus would do? Question mark. The answer is not clear. We need to be careful, because there may be also sinister forces more at work than we think in our very time.